And this is Ken Kraetzer for Sons of the American Legion Radio, RallyPoint.com, a special edition of Sons of the American Legion Radio. We have a chance to visit with a U.S. Army veteran from Rhode Island who is U.S. Senator Jack Reed. Senator, good to have a chance to say hello today.
Great to be here. Thanks, Ken.
Hey, I appreciate that. You are on a number of very important committees in Washington. You have tremendous service in Washington. In Congress, and but we cover West Point football and a lot of the events at the U.S. Military Academy, which is your alma mater. And tell us, if you would, a little bit about your experience at West Point, what you learned there that has helped you with your career.
Well, I learned very early that it's not about you, it's about accomplishing the mission and also protecting those you lead. And it's also about understanding that some of the best advice you'll ever get is from not just your commanders, but also your senior subordinates, particularly non-commissioned officers. But it gave me the example of my classmates who were remarkable men. At that time, they were all men. Remarkable men who were dedicated to the country, wanted to serve, and wanted to do so selflessly, with integrity and with honor, and those are values that are important everywhere.
Absolutely, and you served in the United States Army as a major. You completed Ranger training, and tell us, if you would, a little bit about your experience serving in the U.S. Army, what you learned, some of the key moments for you.
Well, I had the good fortune of being assigned to the 82nd Airborne Division. I commanded Bravo Company in the 2nd Battalion, the 504th Parachute Infantry Regiment. And again, one of the great lessons I learned was, listen to those that have experience. Listen to your non-commissioned officers. My platoon sergeant, my first sergeant, were absolutely instrumental in getting me and the whole company through difficult training, difficult exercises. As a parachutist, I got my senior wings, so I was a jump master at the end. So I was able to help get guys out the door, and I remember starting off, as everyone does, tentatively jumping out the door myself. So it was a great experience. It taught me about discipline, integrity, but most importantly, I think it taught me to listen to those people who've got experience.
Hey, we do a lot of work with the ROTC program at Providence College, the Patriot Battalion. ROTC produces about 5,000 lieutenants for the U.S. Army each year. Just tell us a little bit about the value of ROTC as a big commissioning source for the Army.
Well, ROTC is the biggest commissioning source. It's indispensable to the success of the United States Army. And one of the things that you quickly understand when you get into a unit like I did in the 82nd, some of the best lieutenants in my company were West Point, but they were also ROTC graduates. I had dear friends who were ROTC graduates who were superb officers. And so the distinction, if there was ever a distinction between source of commissioning, disappears as soon as you get with a unit. And you appreciate the contributions that ROTC makes. And just the sheer size, the number of lieutenants coming on active duty every year from ROTC is critical. In fact, I would like to see the ROTC program expanded, if possible, into other universities and colleges.
Absolutely. We were in Washington a couple of weeks ago for the American Legion legislative meeting, and one of the terrific sessions was the chairman and ranking members of the Veterans Affairs Committee, Representative Takano, Dr. Phil Rowe, Senator Isaacson, and Senator Tester. And there was a lot of discussion about the new Mission Act and how much money should go out to private health care providers in order to take care of veterans more promptly. What you're thinking about the Mission Act and its implementation?
Well, the Mission Act is important because it's going to guarantee to those pre-9/11 veterans some of the comprehensive care and services that are provided to more recent veterans. That's important. Implementation is critical. That's why I've joined several of my colleagues to write letters to the Secretary of Veterans Affairs to ask him how they're going to deploy the resources. And we are concerned that we don't in some way try to undermine the, I think, terrific system that we have now. It can be improved, all systems can, but the basic system of VA hospitals and VA clinics, etc., we don't want to simply give people a voucher and say go off and find health care. We want a system, and I see this in Providence at our VA hospital, which is really cares for the veterans, really knows the veterans.
Sure.
They know them individually, they follow through with them, they go the extra mile to help them, and that's not a transactional relationship. That's a commitment, that's a mission. So again, we think this act will provide some improvements, cover some gaps. There are some areas in the country where it's a long way to go to get to a VA hospital, so it's probably more efficient to go to a local provider. But we don't want that basic sort of structure of VA hospitals with dedicated VA employees displaced by some type of voucher system.
Well, one of the key points in that session was trying to find a way to prevent the scourge of veteran suicide, an average of 20 a day. And one of the points that Senator John Tester made, backed up by the other committee members, is that very few of the veterans who have committed suicide had been in the VA system receiving treatment. They said only about 6 out of 20 of these daily suicides were being cared for by the VA. And of course, President Trump signed an executive order last week on this. What do you see as the ways, the remedies to try to take care of veterans and reduce this awful suicide rate?
Well, first, the suicide rate is tragic, and it's something that cannot be tolerated. We've got to do everything we can at every level. The executive orders of the president, the congressional legislation, and constant oversight. One thing we obviously have to do is more outreach. We have to engage veterans and get them involved, make them aware that there are facilities and there are clinics and counseling available to them. Otherwise, they could just, assume it's too far or it's too expensive or it's not accessible. Then we have to also make sure that we're aware, and not just the VA facilities, but all the facilities, because one of those interesting figures that I saw was the number of people who unfortunately took their lives but were in some type of emergency room within days or weeks before with various complaints. What we've got to do is train not only the VA but throughout our system doctors to be more sensitive, particularly when a veteran comes in, to the fact that they might be suffering from trauma that they won't talk about but could lead to a tragic suicide. Those are some of the issues, but one of the things is just this outreach program. So we have to have the resources. Last September we passed the funding bill for fiscal year 2019 on time before the end of the last fiscal year, and we put a sufficient amount of money, I think, in for this outreach. Now we've got to have the VA get the job done, get out there and contact these veterans.
And one of the other distinguished guests to our meeting 2 weeks ago in Washington was the Speaker of the House of Representatives, Nancy Pelosi, who spoke to the members of Congress, over 50 bipartisan, who went to the Munich Security Conference to confirm the importance of NATO and the NATO alliance. My dad served in Germany in the 1950s, defending the border there. Why is the importance of NATO as relevant today as it was post-World War II, would you say?
Well, NATO is a force multiplier. If the United States was confronting some of the threats, particularly the renewed threats from Russia alone, we wouldn't be as effective. But in an alliance, and it's shown its strength for 70 years, we're more effective. We can collaborate. We can go ahead and work together with other countries as we've done over these last 70 years. In fact, it was interesting, last year at about the same time President Trump was overseas in Brussels, not particularly enthusiastic about NATO. I sponsored a resolution that passed the Senate by 97-2, saying that NATO is one of the strengths of our military posture and our national security. And the timing and that resolution sent a message to our allies that there is a bipartisan strong support for NATO, and it should be. It is shown over 70 years that it is able to help us stabilize the world and maintain peace.
And Senator Jack Reed, just one last question. There were hearings recently in the past week about providing safety and improved environments for military families at bases, and also for women who serve in the military. What would you say on the key means of taking care of military families and women who serve in the military?
Well, one of the principles of any commander is that he or she must protect their subordinates, that not manipulate them, use them, or ignore them, but protect them. That's one of the, again, you asked me initially what I learned at West Point. One of the key lessons is you protect your troops. You go, the last mile for them. It's symbolic. You're the last guy in the mess line, but it's practical. You're making sure they have good housing. You're making sure that they're not being preyed upon by others, be they unscrupulous vendors downtown or on the internet, or unscrupulous fellow soldiers who would try to foist themselves on someone else. That's a key command element, and we've got to get the commanders, all of them, from the chiefs right down to the platoon leaders, keyed in on that and focused in that to protect their troops, make sure they're not exploited. And that's, I think, what I heard from the stories about the housing, the stories about the sexual predation. This is a command responsibility, and each commander, and again, we had in terms of the housing, we had the secretaries and the service chiefs up. They get it too. They're asking themselves, what are we doing to make sure the command is focused on protecting the soldier, sailor, Marine, airman, and Coast Guardsman.
Hey, Senator Jack Reed of Rhode Island, thank you so much for taking time to talk with us on Sons of the American Legion Radio, and thank you for your service to our country on behalf of everybody at the American Legion and RallyPoint.com. Great to chat.
Yes, sir. Bye-bye.